Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fullest Podcast. I'm your host, Nikki Bostwick, and today's guest is Jason Hommel, who's the author of The Copper Revolution, Healing with Minerals. Jason grew up ski racing in the Sierra Mountains of Lake Tahoe, and as an athlete, he understood the toll that the sport can take on the body and the need for recovery. Eventually, this led him to discover the many benefits of copper on the body and to author the book, The Copper Revolution. We're so excited to have Jason on the show today to talk us through the power of copper to heal ourselves. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Nikki. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on. I'm so happy this worked out. I've been hearing so much about copper, and I have a background in yoga. And so when I studied Ayurveda a little bit, I know that they're big fans of copper bottles, and they use a lot of copper in, different healing rituals. But I'm just so curious to dive in because I know that it's been hot in my community, but I haven't really dove in whatsoever. So I'm excited to have an expert on our show on this topic.
Well, thank you. That's great. I'm actually drinking water out of a copper cup right now. I'm familiar with the Ayurvedic practice, and gosh, that takes me all the way back to my college days when there were some Ayurvedists in town in Boulder, Colorado, who were trying to always pitch me what they had to offer. And I've always been interested in yoga and stretching just for ski racing and herbs and things of this nature and vitamins and minerals. In fact, I first got back into copper, quite a long time ago.
I'd love for you to start there, I guess. What led you to discover copper in the first place?
So, gosh, there was a newsletter 34 years ago, back when I was ski racing, and I had a particular problem with heel spurs. And this newsletter said that if you take magnesium and zinc and copper, it would make bone spurs go away. So I had boot bang and heel spurs growing, calcifications, and other ski racers were doing weird things like, getting surgically removed the heel spurs or arch spurs, and then also they were blowing out their boots with a heat gun to try to distort the boot so it would not hurt them so much. And I thought those were, I even had my boots distorted for my own heel spurs one year, but they were getting worse. And so when I had found this newsletter, I said, oh, I'm going to apply this. I'm going to be able to avoid surgery, and that's going to be awesome. And sure enough, it totally worked within 3 months.
Wow.
I did a lot of magnesium and a lot of copper and a lot of zinc. And it was pitched as a temporary fix. And then it said you should stop because we really don't know what high doses of copper could deplete other minerals. And so therefore there's potential danger. I said, okay, well, that's what I did. And the following year after that, I now realized I had my best ski racing year ever, and I was never able to duplicate it. And it's probably because I didn't know it at the time, but copper heals the body in easily 200 different ways, in more ways than you can even count. It's amazing. So that's kind of how I got into it. But I really got into copper again I sort of rediscovered copper about 5 years ago. I've always never really liked copper as a supplement. I always had it in my arsenal, but it always made me a little nauseous, and that made me always a little skeptical. And I didn't really like it because of the nausea. And gosh, I guess about 6 years ago or 6.5, I was diagnosed low copper, low zinc. So I started taking more zinc and started taking copper regularly, and it stopped my nosebleeds. And I thought that was pretty curious because I had a problem with nosebleeds. And finally, I learned that copper stops bleeding. And I said, okay, well, this is even more curious. Maybe it's from the copper because I hadn't had a nosebleed in a year and a half when I was being very diligent on copper. So I decided to stop the copper, and figuring that if the nosebleeds returned, I'd find my way back to copper again. I just stored that away in my little head, and then I entered a period of brain fog and low energy, and it was horrible for about 6 to 8 months. And I couldn't quite figure out what the problem was because I really hadn't done an extensive study into copper yet. It's 5 years ago. So I tried herbs for adrenal fatigue and all these things. I even had a fainting spell once, and I'm like, what in the heck is going on? And it's not until the nosebleeds returned that I found my way back to copper. And so I started taking 10 milligrams. I felt significantly better. And I began to wonder, well, why can't I take more than 10 milligrams? What's the reason? So I started my research because, see, before I had done research that says, 10 milligrams is the upper limit, 0.9 milligrams is the lower limit, stay within the range. And I thought my research was complete. So I was, taking 3 to 6 to 9 milligrams. Well, when I found my way back to copper, I'm like, why do we have to stop at 10 again? Did more research, and I found that the answer was that's the level that no liver injury takes place. And I felt those were a peculiar choice of words because it didn't make sense to me, because What's the level that causes some liver damage?
Yeah.
And in attempting to answer that question, I ended up, really, really, really studying and realized they don't know the answer to that question yet. They never did the follow-up studies. And there's 4 government agencies that admit that they've never studied at what level copper causes liver damage, and they really don't know. And they never did follow-up studies. So basically the door is wide open to do those studies, and they've suggested people should do those studies. But that's very, very deep in their fine print.
Yeah. So what exactly does copper do for the body? And are there any particular ailments that copper is especially good for?
Right. So copper does, like I said, at least 200 different things. The biggest are improved energy. We need it to make ATP from oxygen, where we convert oxygen and food into energy for the body. That's the ATP. That's probably one of the biggest things that it does. But we also need copper for collagen production, so we don't have wrinkles. We need it for melanin production for the color of our tan in our skin and in our hair. We need it for proper nerve functioning, proper muscle functioning, for bone strength. Every single organ and tissue and cell in the body need copper. So it just does so much. And then the other big thing that it does is detoxify the body. Copper and zinc and copper itself make a ton of different antioxidant enzymes in the body that detoxify literally everything. Any sort of chemical toxin, mercury and lead and arsenic. So as far as ailments go, I guess probably the biggest one would be the thing that people call chronic fatigue syndrome, or connective tissue disorders like arthritis, or any sort of brain fog or brain disease, because copper heals the nerves in at least 15 different ways, increasing neurotransmitters. It acts as a neurotransmitter itself, improves memory. It heals anemia. That's the big one. Increases red blood cells, increases white blood cells, kills germs. So any sort of ailment that you have, copper really attacks it in every which way. Even diabetes, heals the pancreas, increases insulin sensitivity, improves heart attacks, kills cancer. I mean, everything, everything, everything.
Okay, so obviously you had mentioned like it's detoxifying and it helps clear metals. So clearly it's helping to clear heavy metals from our environment, from our food, from vaccines, probably.
Yes.
So then I'm assuming then the way that it works, like, is it like an adaptogenic thing where it is just adapts to what your body needs? Or is it like what it's doing is clearing out all the toxicity so that your body can just function better?
It does a lot more than clear out the toxicity, but you need to get the dose up to a certain amount just to even start activating all those enzymes. You need to have enough copper that your body will readily, easily excrete the copper, and that happens at around 10 milligrams in the studies, 10 milligrams a day, and then you're excreting most of the copper that you're bringing in which case it then acts as a detoxifying agent, because it will bind to the other minerals and make all sorts of detoxifying enzymes like metallothionein, which is made also with zinc and selenium, which detoxes mercury, lead, and arsenic. It makes superoxide dismutase, which detoxes thousands of chemical toxins. So it's really in the enzymes that help it do its detoxing power. But it also binds directly to things like fluoride and bromide, which are the top 2 number 1 recognized toxins that are in the human body. And so those are also very important.
So then how is it that you're suggesting people introduce copper in their practice? Like, is it through, like we just talked about, using a copper water bottle? Like, how can you figure out the dosages? Is it found naturally in food?
Yeah, so maybe you can help me with this, but it took me a long time to find how much copper we get from drinking out of a copper cup. And I found that the answer was about 0.4 milligrams per day, which is not a whole lot. And I'm taking about 30 milligrams of copper a day in the form of supplements. I used to take pills, but now I make my own supplement from copper sulfate. I also apply about 70 milligrams a day to my skin, usually just about once a day. And I get the copper that way. And I balance it with zinc and vitamin C and iodine and sulfur and boron and a bunch of other minerals too.
Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Fullest podcast. As you may or may not know, we've been sharing the benefits of saffron with our community for a little while now, and I want to offer 15% off our entire product line to our podcast listeners with code TheFullestPodcast at checkout online at thefullest.com. Growing up in a Persian family, I'd always felt the benefit of saffron in my life, but it wasn't until I stumbled on the research that it made me realize what powerful medicine it is. Saffron has been proven over and over again in clinical, double-blind placebo trials to be an effective form of treatment for depression, anxiety, and ADHD. Saffron has been used by many cultures for thousands of years for these purposes, and now the research is here to finally back it up, proving that plant medicines and ancient healing practices can actually be an effective alternative to pharmaceuticals. At the Fullest, we believe that incorporating this ancient wisdom into our modern lives is the most powerful and accessible path to healing. We also believe that everyone's journey is unique, so our product line offers a variety of formulas to help you curate saffron into your personal wellness routine. Warm Feelings is our saffron latte powder and comes in individual sachets and in large sustainable glass jars. Featuring 150 milligrams of high-grade saffron in a creamy bed of coconut and cardamom. It's the perfect coffee alternative and feel-good start to your day. If you prefer to pop a pill, Kinder Thoughts is our 30-day supply of saffron capsules, and it's a super simple way to support your body and mood with the power of saffron. Not to mention, it's really amazing for headaches if you feel one coming on. Our saffron soaks are the latest addition to our product lineup, which include Exhale, our saffron salt bath blend, and Inhale, our probiotic-rich saffron milk bath blend. Soak in them to support your digestion, inflammation, and support your skin microbiome. Honestly, at the moment, I'm using each of these products on a daily basis depending on my needs. And to help you begin your saffron journey, we're offering a discount of 15% off just for our podcast listeners with code TheFullestPodcast at checkout. I hope you enjoy your new daily saffron ritual.
Do you sell, is this a supplement that you make for yourself or you sell it? How does that work? What form of copper is being put on your skin or being used in a supplement?
Right. So I recommend that people take either a copper glycinate supplement off the shelf for 3 milligrams. That's the way we did it for the first 3 years. But then I discovered that copper sulfate is a lot cheaper. You can actually buy copper sulfate crystals. And what we recommend is people put 5/8 of a teaspoon of copper sulfate crystals into a 2-ounce dropper bottle, and that makes a 1 milligram per drop solution that you can take and put it in your hot drinks, or you could apply it to your skin directly, which is what we do.
So are you suggesting that lower doses of copper aren't good, but higher doses are, or is that not?
Yeah,
true?
That's correct. We are taking 30 milligrams. My wife and I are taking 30 milligrams of copper per day in the form of a drop that we put on our drinks across our 2 morning cups of coffee. And then we apply about 70 milligrams to our skin topically to get even extra. So yeah, we have found that more is better, but there's a diminishing return. If we try to do 50 to 60 milligrams orally, we get the runs. So we hit what's called bowel tolerance. You can take bowel tolerance, magnesium to bowel tolerance, or vitamin C to bowel tolerance. And so when that happens, it's time to back off.
How has this been traditionally used? And why is it not more widely used and advocated for?
So that's a very good 2-part question. Historically, copper was used as a cure-all. In ancient times, they used it because copper stops bleeding, they used it and they packed wounds with it. It was curing things like leg ulcers or battle wounds from battles. They'd put copper sulfate crystals right on the wound. They would use it for arthritis. Even today, people have the idea that if they wear a copper bracelet or a necklace or something, it will help arthritis. And it certainly does, because we need copper to help make collagen, and it helps detoxify, and that's good for arthritis. But why hasn't it been more advocated? It's an interesting question, because if you go back over the last 100 years, people used to get about 5 milligrams of copper per day in the food supply. But soils are depleted with artificial fertilizers and with glyphosate, which also chelates copper. And so we're getting a lot less copper in our diet today. We're only getting, on average, 80% of people are getting 0.6 milligrams of copper or less in their diets. And in fact, the government, when it came up with its studies, it said that if people get 0.58 milligrams, it causes copper deficiency in 80% of people. And yet 80% of people today are in that exact situation. And the government said that it was unethical to replicate those studies because it's so dangerous. And yet 80% of the people are in that exact same dangerous situation if they're not taking any copper. And then there's 15% of the people, they take some copper, and but it's mixed with iron. And iron blocks the copper. So of the people who are typically supplementing with copper in a multi-mineral, they're getting almost no copper at all. And in fact, people who get those high iron supplements, iron is one of the one things that's associated with a shortened lifespan. So, why isn't it widespread? It has to be, it's something only for our era. 70 years ago, people didn't need copper. There weren't as many poisons and people were getting it in the food supply. So it's only in the modern era with glyphosate and everything else that we really need it more than ever before.
That makes so much sense. And most people obviously aren't eating an organic regenerative diet. Even if you are, you're still being bombarded with, all the toxins in the air and the water and everything. So it makes perfect sense why we need it. And yeah, like I noticed too, like, I think the copper acts as like a fungicide too.
Yes.
Right?
It is. It does. It totally does. People are curing their fungus and mold. A lot of people from the mold and fungus groups on Facebook jumped over to our group because our people were healing mold issues so quickly with copper supplementation.
That's so incredible. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So copper surfaces are known to kill germs on contact. And in fact, taking copper increases our own white blood cells. It increases our collagen formation. And we believe that even our white blood cells will use copper and deliver copper directly to a pathogen to kill it. But mold is an interesting pathogen. I suspect that we get infected with mold as a means to help clear away our dead tissues. But if our tissues are strong enough and not dying and not turning over all the time, and we're not creating a bunch of new dead cells or tissues in our bodies, then there's nothing for the molds to feed off of. Or if, for example, we're toxic and the toxins are causing our tissues to die at a rapid pace, then we're going to need the mold, because mold goes hand in hand with heavy metal toxicity. People are usually afflicted with both. But once you clear out the heavy metals, then there's nothing for the mold to feed on, and so the mold just simply goes right away. It goes away because the body's strong enough and there's no need for it to even be there.
Wow, that's amazing. So I'm all about like whole food supplements.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a little bit more about how I can take in more copper into my diet, into my daily regimen without necessarily like you're saying ancient times they used like copper sulfate or, decades ago, whenever, like for battle wounds and whatnot. But is copper sulfate a substance that's found, is it synthetic or is it found naturally in the environment? How can I do it if I just wanted like a whole food version, but really wanted high dose at the same time?
So in theory, we thought at first that liver would be the one food of choice to get copper naturally in the food supply. But the trouble is, just as copper deficiency is rampant among humans, it's also rampant among farm animals. It's probably the number one deficiency in all of farm animals.
Wow.
So therefore, there have been people have also wanted to try and make a liver supplement, desiccated liver capsules. And this one guy, he tested the livers of his cows, and there was no copper in the livers. And normally you get about 64 milligrams of copper per pound. When you look these things up, it's somebody who did the study maybe 20, 30, 50, 70 years ago. So he decided to test, and there was no copper in the liver at all. So you could now go out and go eat liver thinking you're going to get some copper, and there could be no copper in there at all. And these were grass-fed cows, right? So you'd think that the grass-fed cows would be extra healthy, but grass is also a natural mineral chelator, which then is going to remove the minerals. So, if you eat a lot of greens, you're also removing minerals from your body over time by going too vegan. In fact, that's the trouble with vegans, is that they are often said that they don't get enough zinc in their diets. And so, I in fact went high vegan for a while, and after about 3 years, I was very demineralized, and I developed horrible constipation, and the fiber wasn't working for me, and I couldn't figure it out. And I just by talking with a friend, we theorized that perhaps I was low in minerals. I took a normal mineral supplement, puked it up immediately. And I said, "Oh, that's probably because I need it, because the osmosis process wasn't even working, and I had some familiarity." So I I stuck with it and chopped it up and buried it in a meal of rice, and I was able to keep it down, and things got better almost immediately. That was probably the beginning of my mineral journey about 6 years ago, and then it led me back to copper and other things. So foods, to answer your question, foods are not a good supply. Is copper sulfate natural? Elements are natural, and in fact, when you buy something that's organic, they can put toxic fluoride on it because fluoride is simply an element. And so it's considered that when you buy dried fruit, they don't even have to list fluoride being used as a fungicide to keep that fruit from spoiling and staying on the shelf for a year. So you could be eating a high fluoride diet just by eating, natural dried fruits at Whole Foods Market, for example, that are purely organic because you get the organically grown label with fluoride. So,
Wow.
so technically speaking, all of the elements are natural. Some are better than others. Copper sulfate is very pure. It's 99% pure if you can find it that pure, in which case, the 1% purities are copper oxide that didn't get attached to the sulfur. So that's very, very pure substance. And in fact, when things are that pure, they're called food grade pure or pharmaceutical grade pure. So maybe instead of thinking about it being natural, thinking about it in terms of purity, it's very, very pure, and that's good.
Wow. I had no idea about the fluoride. I mean, sulfates, are they required to label the sulfates but not the fluoride? And is the fluoride because it's in the water or it's like literally added?
Well, they literally add and spray the dried fruits with a fluoride mixture so that it won't turn to
Oh my
mold
God.
within a month on the shelf at Whole Foods or any natural organic dried fruits. You have to completely avoid dried fruits if you want to avoid sulfur, or I'm sorry, if you want to avoid fluoride.
Okay, so copper sulfate is what you recommend people take
That's
in the doses that you are saying. And if you use it on your skin, how are you using it on your skin?
So we make the 1 milligram per drop solution, and we just apply about 5 drops to the palm of our hands, rub it all over the hands, and then apply it to the shoulders and arms. I do it again. I put it on my chest. Do it again. Belly, back, legs, feet, just like that.
Taking it in transdermally versus sublingually, can you tell us a little bit about the difference?
Yeah, so we had been used to taking other minerals applied to the skin. People take, magnesium baths, magnesium sulfate baths. That's called Epsom salts. So that's a thing that people do. And then people have applied, topical magnesium chloride also to the skin. That's a thing in the health circles, and people have applied iodine to the skin. And so us having been familiar with that, we said, well, we just wondered, well, can we apply copper sulfate to our skin? And we did. And we found that it was a good way to bypass nausea in the stomach. I think part of the reason why we get nausea in the stomach from copper supplements is that it is such a powerful detoxer. The toxins rush right into the stomach to bind with it almost immediately. In fact, we've had confirmation from that from several of our forum members who they go and they use their fluoride toothpaste and then they try to take the copper and the nausea is far higher. Or they eat or they drink like a black tea or a green tea, which is a very high fluoride tea. In fact, you can get about 5 times more fluoride that way than just in tap water. And they drink these teas and then they try to take the copper and then the nausea is way worse. So fluoride itself is known for causing nausea in the stomach, and fluoride can bind to copper directly, which is why they warn about copper in the pipes. It's not the copper in the pipes causing the problem. It's the fluoride in the pipes attaching to the copper in the pipes that is the problem, because when you're ingesting copper in a form that's really a copper 2 fluoride molecule, that's the toxic form of copper. It's not that copper itself is toxic, it's that it's already bound to the toxin. You'd rather it bind to the toxin in the body and then carry them out. You don't want to ingest extra fluoride that way.
Okay, that makes sense. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm really excited to start taking copper in that form in terms of like transdermally. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really great way to introduce it if someone does feel like they want to bypass that feeling of being nauseous.
Yes, it does it somewhat. The first 5 applications, my wife had nausea, but decreasing nausea each time when she did topical, because we started almost with the whole body. And she had a history of taking some fluoride-based medications like Prozac. And so she had to sort of get past that fluoride detox to tolerate the copper.
We need to do a whole fluoride podcast. Like I had no idea that Prozac is fluoride based.
Yes, it is. It is a fluoride. So you know how we said sulfate? It's because it's bound. Well, there's fluorine, which is the molecule, and then it's fluoride once it's bound. So people say not that Prozac contains a fluoride, but is a fluoride because there's a fluorine molecule attached to it, just like there's a sulfur molecule attached to copper sulfate.
Is that the same for other prescriptions like Lexapro that are similar?
Yes, when there's a fluoride or three fluoride molecules attached to it, it becomes a fluoride.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
So
Just
yes.
it's all over the place. But how can we, so going back really quick to the copper transdermally, can you just like use your copper to put in the bath?
Yeah, but you wouldn't really want to because it gets so diluted that way. It's better to just apply it topically to the skin. And if you can't tolerate it, maybe like if it's burning your skin and you're too weak or too toxic and then yeah, putting it in the bath might be a diluted way to do it. But some people try that and foot baths with copper. That works.
But then you can't really dose it that way, right? Like you
Yeah,
don't know how much to absorb.
yeah, it's really not the appropriate dose. But two
Yeah.
people do get energy from a copper bath, so it does seem to work.
Would you do like a copper sulfate bath?
Yes. Yeah, you just put some copper sulfate crystals right in the bath and they would dissolve and get it that way.
That's amazing. And then if someone's taking copper sulfate, what's the dosage on that? Is it different? Like, how do they know how much they're getting?
Right. So we ran the math and we found that we need to really put in 4.7 grams of crystals on a scale, and 25% of copper sulfate crystals is contained copper. So to dose yourself with just the copper, so like a 2-ounce bottle of water contains roughly 1,180 milligrams or drops. And so if you want to make a 1 milligram per drop, you take that number, multiply it by 4, and you get 4.7 grams. So if you measure out 4.7 grams, another way to measure it, of course, is 5/8 of a teaspoon of copper sulfate crystals into a 2-ounce bottle. And you have to heat up the water, use distilled water so it dissolves a little bit easier and is a little bit more clear. And then shake it up about 40 times for about 30 seconds. And there you got your solution.
Wow. So how can people stay connected with you, ask you questions, join your community? What does that look like? Maybe buy your supplements?
Right. So, yeah, we're not selling supplements, but we do run an informational Facebook page called The Copper Revolution, same as the book, just The Copper Revolution Healing with Minerals. You can find us on Facebook if you just search for Facebook groups. So we'll come right up.
Okay, amazing. And and then your book?
Yeah, and the book is only available exclusively at Amazon.com. It's available in an ebook as well as a paperback format.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for taking the time to share with us. I'm so excited to share more about this with our community, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon to talk about all the other things.
Well, thank you for being such a great host and asking great questions. That question of why do I think copper hasn't been more widely used and advocated for? I mean, it's a really great question, but copper is really, it's an element for our day because of so many toxins in our food supply, and our food supply is depleted. So that's why people are getting such great healing results in our forum. It's really tremendous.
That makes sense. It just happens to be very timely for us.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. We'll talk to you soon.